from the Chamber of Commerce. We're going to introduce ourselves formally for the record, if you can do the same as well. I'm Deputy Montfort Tadier, I'm the chair of this panel.
I am Deputy Max Andrews, a panel member.
I'm Alexandra Worley from the Retail and Supply Committee from Chamber of Commerce.
And I'm Tim Crowley, I'm the chair of the Visitor Economy Committee at Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you and welcome to this. I think it's your first hearing. You're most welcome. Just draw your attention to this statement in front of you. It says that you're covered by parliamentary privilege essentially, so as long as what you tell us is what you believe to be true, you're not going to be held legally responsible in any other way for that. It can feel like quite a formal process, but we hope you feel a bit relaxed at the same time. It's not inquisitorial. It's really for us to try and find out some information that will help us with any potential findings and recommendations that we might wish to make to government. So, thank you. If I can ask, firstly, would you be able to just give us a brief outline of some of the things that you do as the Chamber in Jersey? And I can put that to either of you.
Yeah.
You want to start?
Go on, you go first.
So Chamber represents over 350 businesses, I think, on the island, and most of the working businesses in Jersey are represented by Chamber. It is, there's an executive committee of which there is, I think, 7 or 8, can't quite remember the number of committees. Those executive committee people are chairs of the subcommittees, and of those subcommittees they represent pretty much all the sectors. So I'm Visitor Economy, Alex is on Retail, there's Financial Services, Building, etc. So represent the entire business community.
Great, thank you. Anything to add?
I think Tim's kind of like covered it all in all honesty,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Just to give you a bit of context for the review, so essentially we know that the world of consumerism, if we can call it that, is changing all the time. The way people pay for things in particular has advanced pretty quickly. You know, we've gone from a time when cash was king. I
think if you speak, we only discussed our positions yesterday briefly, and I was just in a text message, and we were agreed. So we're coming here today knowing that our both committees have the same view, and we didn't discuss it outside of that. So Alex, perhaps if you want to lead.
Yeah, so I think we spent the time speaking to businesses that are within our retail committee and people that sit within the retail committee. Some members, gave their views in terms of cash, how their business is propositioned at the moment, whether they do take cash, whether they don't take cash. And across the board, relatively, there was a mixture. Some businesses, some smaller business, ones that were probably linked to tourism, maybe a little bit more, saw a little bit more of a cash. But then larger businesses that did still accept cash but had over, probably in a post-COVID world really, seen cash, as you mentioned earlier, really kind of like decrease over time. As Tim had mentioned, from a retail committee and visitor economy, the view is that it's down to individual businesses to be able to choose how they want to be able to move forward as to whether they accept cash or don't accept cash. So both kind of like work for some.
Yeah, I know in your work capacities outside of the Chamber, you're both involved to a certain extent in the world of tourism. Do you think that is cash more prevalent in terms of usage with tourists versus maybe the general local population? Are there any trends that you've managed to even anecdotally surmise?
I can give you kind of the direction of travel it's moved on really, and I'll just take, I'm the Managing Director of Lamar Wine Estate as well as this role, so I'll give you an example. So 2019, where we sell tour tickets and we're selling them at the gate on arrival to people, and they're paying about 60% card and 40% cash. In 2018, 2019 it was moving. Post-COVID we moved to an online booking system called Fair Harbour, which is kind of international, owned by bookings.com I think. We've now moved that from kind of all the tickets purchased when you arrive at the estate to virtually none of them. We're up to in the 75 to 80% number of pre-purchased tickets. All of that, of course, is done via card, via online, and it has made us a lot more productive as a business. So it's a productivity-driven aim, but it came across at pace. It was happening before COVID. What COVID did is accelerated. So I don't think it's new. It just accelerated the speed at which it happened significantly for us. And we see it as a very good thing for a number of reasons. One is we can plan our day much better if we know how many people are coming in advance. So it's much better productivity. It realistically means lower number of staff because we're not handling cash in the same way we were. It also means that we have some guarantees and certainty in the day, whereas if it's wet weather, they may decide not to come last minute. Now the pre-purchasing, we've got a much more even business model, so the cafe is busy, rain or sunshine, equally than it would be before. That was much more down to how we feel on the day. So it's much better for the visitor economy because it's more stable to pre-purchase, and that kind of headspace comes from pre-booking online, and that doesn't mean cash. On site, when people do arrive, it's still, because I checked this yesterday, of the whole year to date, we have a slight increase in cash use this year from about 8% cash last year to about 10% this year.
Is that 8% of those who
Of the
arrive?
on-site spend.
Yeah.
So not the pre-purchase,
including in
that's
the
just
shop?
retail in the shop, yeah. Or in the cafe, that they would choose to pay with cash. So it's still very rare, and that actually comes a lot from our German and European visitors who tend to carry cash, oddly. And I'm not really sure why that is, but that tends to be a higher proportion of the German visitors who decide to get cash in advance. I suppose we do on holidays, sometimes get cash out before we travel. But not, and it's not age related. Everybody up to the average age of a visitor in Jersey is currently 58, my memory serves me right. And September particularly will see a much older demographic than that. We don't see any different in the months. So high season when you have younger people in August compared to October when we'll have much older people on our visits, the cash use is the same. So there's very few people who don't have a card. If I haven't met one yet, if I'm honest. We don't take American Express, for instance. As soon as you say you don't, they offer you at least 2 other cards as an alternative. They have a debit card or a credit card. I think the other thing for us is it's hugely beneficial to us for security purposes. We don't have any worry about or any equal worry about theft from the business, from either staff or customers worry about it. We have a much more controlled environment of controlling and accounting for that income because it's all through a card process. That wasn't the case before. It was much more balances and checks, much more labour, much more risk. So that's all reduced significantly. So it's a much better environment for business to work in, much safer, I think. The other thing is cash itself I want to talk about because when I looked into this in detail, I actually discussed it with our bank, and the reality is for us, cash has gone up in cost significantly in the last 3 years. And I'll sit here and blame the banks for the first minute, but on investigating that myself and seeing how much we pay and how much has gone up, the banks themselves effectively blame the regulators for putting more pressure on money laundering, and therefore the pressure that's put on them to report, it comes back on us as a cost. For instance, if I take cash from the vineyard in St Mary's and I wish to bank it, I have to put 2 people in a car because the insurance doesn't cover one carrying cash, and I have to send them off for an hour to St Berlard's, queue at the bank in St Berlard's. There's no business banking shortcut. You have to queue behind everybody else, and then they have to drive back. So I need to provide a car, insurance, 2 people, and lose them out of the business for probably an hour and a half. And that's not in any way as cheap as using a card.
How often would you have to do that?
Once a week, because you cannot store, once you get to a certain value of cash in a season, it's not, the insurance doesn't cover the storage of that cash on the site, the safe, unless you increase your insurance, and that carries all the risk.
You presumably have to do that less than in the past, though.
Significantly less. And we tried a cashback, so trying to get customers to take back the cash, which they do charge you a higher fee to use your machines and terminals to do that. There's an additional charge on the cost per month if you were to have a cashback facility. But reality is people don't want cash, so we can't get rid of it, even offering it back to people. And 99% of people saying no. So we end up accumulating cash. Is
it fair to say that the Chamber of Commerce would take a neutral stance on any advice that it gave to its members with regard to taking cash? You wouldn't Is it fair to say you'd leave that as a commercial decision for your members?
Definitely. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, I think businesses are different and they have different needs in different sectors. And it is not for Chamber to be advising on what they should or shouldn't do, but I think there's such a variety of cases from financial services to building contractors to painters and decorators, right through to retail and tourism. In our sector, it is a personal choice. You have somewhere like Lausanne that's been cashless for 4 years probably now, I'm not quite sure, but and it doesn't propose. I did speak to Mike there, and I think he's sent separate evidence in himself in an email, but they have had no problem. I use that facility regularly, including last week, and and expected, but he doesn't meet any challenge from visitors. Initially, I think there was a bit of a move, but he was early. Now it's relatively common.
Just out of interest, at Lamar, do you have, is it preferential for the customer to book online? Is there a discount if they book in advance?
There is.
Yeah, can we ask the margin?
We just give £1 off, basically, for booking online, because effectively that,
It's guaranteed.
if we do that with enough people, that eliminates a member of staff managing cash.
But in terms of your cost, if I turn up on the day and pay cash or card, it's the same cost?
It's the same.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no benefit for using card. We don't punish people for using it. It costs us more. And if you carry on in the model we're in now and you project 5 years forward, I can't guarantee you that there wouldn't be a cost for using cash, because right now we're absorbing bank costs that are unreasonably high comparative to a card. So when the switch goes to significant amounts more, then you'd have to say who really pays for that. It shouldn't be the card holder who's paying for the cash user.
Was there a crossover point where you noticed the cash was more punitive for you?
I think COVID was a rocket ship. It was happening, but then it just went from zero to here. And we all employ, and I think retail is very similar, a lot of vulnerable people. We have older people, retired people, younger people, and particularly the older people have an issue with touching cash for health reasons. And if they're touching different people's cash all day long, then the risk of them being ill and out of work is higher and for longer. Yeah. And therefore, we don't particularly think, I wouldn't want to be in a position to force a member of staff to handle cash if they felt they didn't want to.
I think you preempted one of our questions on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to push this a little bit more, because one of the decisions we're going to have to make at some point, is whether we make any kind of recommendation to government about requiring or encouraging businesses to take cash. And that's not something we would do lightly, for example. So on the one hand, we've from a visitor point of view, I would ask, are you concerned about the message that it would send out if for example, nowhere in Jersey accepted cash? Would that put some visitors in a difficult position, do you think?
I don't think it would necessarily put them in a difficult position. Some of the things that we've experienced as passengers are leaving the airport, for example, they might have 1, 2, 3 £1 notes that they effectively kind of like want to dispose of. But I wouldn't say that would put them in a difficult position.
But the airport the shops at the airport accept cash?
The shops at the airport accept cash, with the exception of our food and beverage outlet. So they don't accept cash, but there's still the
But airlines
facility.
Probably don't nowadays.
Airlines are cashless, and Condor are also cashless as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. One of the submissions we've received, and in fact it becomes a theme, if I can find it to quote, and if I don't, I'll paraphrase the submission talks about. So let me see if I can find it. It essentially talks about people in the island who might have be described as vulnerable, or have for whatever reason don't have a bank account and therefore don't have access to any other payment form apart from cash. Where do you think the balance of duty of care for those individuals to access services across the board for potentially frequenting your members' outlets might fall in terms of making sure they're included in society?
You want to go first?
So I think it's, I think one of the things that both kind of like subcommittees are talking about is in terms of customers having that choice and having the option as to whether to pay cash or whether to pay card. I suppose I can only speak from my side, you might be able to add in, but retailers have seen a significant decrease in the number of customers kind of like using cash. There are some outlets out there on the island, you know, as Tim has mentioned one there, I'm aware of some others as well that are completely cashless. There then would be that small minority ultimately that wouldn't be able to use those outlets and wouldn't be able to use those units if the choice was then left down to the individual retailer or...
I think for me, it doesn't really affect the visitor economy much because people who use cash also have cards. So the presumption that because you're using cash, you don't have a card is not a realistic one for me. And I think when you go back to the local government policy around that vulnerable group of people, I think I haven't seen, and I have searched relative data to show me how many would be affected and in what way. And I would want to see that before I could really comment on the impact. It's a personal choice for our business currently to take cash, and we take it because we have a customer service policy that dominates. We'll take whatever method they wish to pay in currently, but that may have a cost in 10 years' time. It might be 10% more to pay with cash, I don't know. That depends on the banking structure, I guess, and our own policy. I don't think it affects very many, and my mum is 95 years old in November, and she pays with card everywhere, and she goes out shopping every week at that age. And I look at her and I think, well, you'd really have to tell me who. I can't think of many scenarios where that group of people you're talking about, if you take from the, and if there is, I think it's far easier for government to deal with that small number of people in a selective way of how you look after them, particularly for, and I know that kind of a swimming pool and stuff was the thing that started this conversation off. And I see that, but I think this is kind of hammer to crack a nut scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to deal with the problem, not the global solution.
So not preempting which way the panel might go, because we obviously have to consider all the evidence. If the panel or the government in its under its own volition were to pass a policy, for want of a better word, to say that to compel businesses to accept both cash and card or contactless, would that be met with a great level of resistance from the Chamber of Commerce and the industry, do you think?
I think my own view is it would. I certainly would. I think our members would create a significant revolt because it's government interfering in things that are commercially orientated, and why would you, is maybe my question. You'd have to really have the evidence to back up why that is. I can see why government facilities like the pool might have a policy that supports cash, and our business makes that decision also, but I wouldn't want to force it on. And 2, 3, 4 years' time, it could be very different for all of us. So, and policy lasts. Whereas,
what if it were an interim policy, say, for a period of a year, whilst we review the situation?
I'm almost positive, if you look at the businesses now that don't take cash, Condor and others, it will, bottom line is it'll increase prices to customers. That's because it'll have to come from somewhere.
That's the only, sorry Tim, that was the only point I was going to add is in terms of the cost. Ultimately, sadly we are seeing businesses closing down and staff being reduced because the cost of sales, wages, etc. is just increasing. And at the moment, there's no sign of that kind of like slowing down. That's only going one way. Yeah. Tim's talked about it already, but some reasons that businesses don't take cash is the cost of it. So whether that be from a staff perspective or actually the banking charges side, I think you would be met with some resistance from businesses to sort of say who is going to cover the cost, and is government going to cover that cost if that's something that is imposed then on businesses, especially for those businesses that don't already take it, because then that's a cost that will straight away go into their profit and loss, and ultimately, as Tim said, could then only be passed back on to islanders or visitors.
And it's a significant reverse policy for a lot of businesses. To bring a lot of cash back into their business would mean a whole policy change, potentially staff issues, till systems, banking issues. Once you've gone 4 years down the road, as some have, that's quite a reversal. and quite a cost associated to it. And also it's not in line with other jurisdictions, so I couldn't see the justification for it when you compare it to mainland UK or Ireland or Europe.
There'd have to be some thought in terms of the banks and how it would impact that, because, HSBC, for example, we've seen closures of some branches that aren't necessarily on the high street, or actually even some on the high street. So again, branches are closing down because people are going to online banking. As Tim said, it's very rare now that people don't have access in some way, shape or form to a card. So then you'd have to think about that as well in terms of the impacts on businesses. Do they have enough staff to be able to process it? Do their opening hours warrant business hours to be able to leave estates and go? So that would also need to be a consideration.
And the cost to businesses are really important when we're going into a new living wage space next year, and there's immense pressure on retail and visitor economy, on cost base, and agriculture is another one, but we are under immense pressure at that level. So any cost added will appear on the price of the products.
I mean, to bring it back, it's the banks ultimately charging these fees. Do you think any pressure needs to be put on the banks to review their charges?
I think that's a matter for government and the banks to discuss, not for our industry. But I don't have any quarrel with the costs, because they're justified if their regulations require it. It's just that has to be passed on. Bottom line is consumers will pay it. So whether it's fair that maybe 0.1% of the population of Jersey has an issue and that 99.99 are the ones funding it is a question.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to quickly add, you do have the banks and the charges, but then you've also got the element of risk to businesses around staff theft.
Yeah.
So it's not just necessarily that the banks, there's potentially kind of like a staff theft, but then, where contactless or paying with a card is used, that transaction, that process is quicker.
Yeah.
So there's also an element there as well, as if you've then got cash and you're transacting with cash, then that will then also slow the transaction down, but then it will also slow down, the customer experience, the passenger experience. And, I can only speak for me personally, but if you look at, I always go to a self-service till, because that for me is the quicker and the most efficient option. And you can see that retailers across the island, supermarkets have all introduced those, and actually they're increasing those because that's what passengers are saying. Passengers want to be able to go and get their food shopping and not put it on a trolley, put it on a checkout like they used to. They want to be able to self-scan it. So again, it's the efficiency. So it's not just necessarily the bank charges for me, it's a couple of other things as well.
I think the theft question is a really important one. I'm in retail since my family owned a retail shop. I grew up in one, and I was managing a group of shops in Jersey 26 years ago before I moved to Lamar. And theft from staff, when we had cash, was about 80% back then, or probably 90% at the beginning of the card era, was huge. I would say once a month somebody was caught stealing in the group I work for. It was that regular. And that's staff. We had 300 odd staff at the time, but in that group. But it's that's all gone. We don't have any of that now. I think from a taxpayer point of view, I'm confident the tax is being paid on all revenues that are generated, because they're much more transparent. And the days of paying your painter in cash and your gardener and all that, that's more or less gone in Jersey. Yeah. Everything is now, even I pay my cleaner by backs, that all that in cash society was prior, wasn't it, when I grew up in Ireland, and there was a significant amount of undisclosed revenue generated and spent, and that isn't the case anymore. And I think legislating for taking cash will revive cash, but increase risk costs and reduce tax, potentially.
Just on the staff theft piece, so before my role at Ports of Jersey, I was the HR and assistant store manager for 7 years at Degrushy. There's then also the cost from a staff side. So not only have you got a member of staff that is potentially stealing, but you've then got the time from the HR investigations and disciplinaries and so on and so forth. So it's a cost as well from that side in terms of actually managing people and managing that investigation.
Huge.
Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Max. I think question 3 has been answered really, but if you'd
Yes,
like to
yeah,
carry on.
indeed. I just want to ask you both what discussions you've had with your respective committees about the use of cash and digital payments.
So like I said earlier, I'd kind of like reached out to people within the committee, and some of those came back and sort of explained that they like to take cash, they want to continue to take cash. Some don't take cash, they'd like to maintain where they are. But then, as Tim had mentioned, you know, from both subcommittees, it was very much, it should be then kind of like left down to the businesses to be able to continue how they wish to run their businesses.
And at any point did somebody mention that they are currently using cash in their business, but they are maybe going to transition to digital transactions only?
Not from my side.
Well, yes, from my side. I think I rang round about 10, I think, roughly, and I split that between hotels, activity providers, attractions, because we have a fairly broad committee. And if I take Liberty Bus, which I haven't spoken to, but I've seen their transcript, and it's, you know, how much can be saved by going cashless. 65,000, if my memory serves me right.
Yeah.
You know, that's exactly right. You know, that's kind of public information you get there. That's the same for any business. That kind of saving is potentially there. And when we're driving for productivity gains now, that's where you look for them. You know, where you can make a significant difference to cost and very little difference to customer service. Because you improve customer service by removing cash. It's quicker at the till. Our tills are linked to the machines. So when you scan items, the money comes up. You can't bypass that process. You have to scan the card and it goes straight into the till. So it's very secure and very quick. And you're moving on to the next person. So from a hotel perspective there, it is kind of like the attractions. The majority of the spend is done in advance online.
Okay.
Because it's pre-booking, generally. You have to pay everything. Either a hotel's not going to, you know, very few people pay by anything except a card, but most of it's done on the pre-booking anyway. So they have very little cash handling. They do in their cafes, but it's in the same proportions as us, probably now getting to the 10% level. And it has, as I say, revived by 2%. I'm not entirely surprised about that. And the reason we've been given by people we've asked, and we have asked customers, is they tend to be managing their budgets with cash. So whilst they have plenty of cards and they're quite happy to pay with a card, if they can, they'll pay with cash because they're budgeting their £200 spend or £300 spend by taking the 300 out and spending it until it's gone. And then, whereas in a card is much more keep spending free from. So that was the reasoning behind it. It's more of a budgeting, not that I don't have a card.
For the individuals, the customers you're talking.
Yes.
Can I just butt in, Max? So I'm trying to understand. There were certain businesses in Jersey, and I'm not saying they were by any means in a majority. I've noticed a few signs around the market, for example, that say we accept cash or card, but we prefer cash. Can you think of any reason why any business or any of your members might choose that business model legitimately?
I cannot.
When I say legitimate, no.
I would have no reason whatsoever to take cash as a preference. There is if you're a small business, I can give you one, and I'm just coming up with this as I speak. The deals we do with credit card companies are quite different depending on the volume and size of your business. So, and the rates I negotiate as a fairly medium to large business, I guess, or certainly medium-sized, are significantly better than my wife owns a small retail shop in the market, and the rates for that, now we get group rates for everything, but I know if I was negotiating just on that basis, I'll be paying a much, possibly three, at least double, if not maybe triple the percentage rate I pay now for my card use. So I think that's probably the main reason, is their banking charges for cash are high, but their credit cards are equally high or perhaps higher.
Small business.
If you're low volume, because you pay a standing charge for the machines a month, it might be £25, £30 to rent the machines, and then you pay a transactional charge every time you use it, a percentage of that And if you have a low volume, you still pay a minimum per month, maybe £25 a month. So if you don't get enough fees out of the tapping, if there's not enough transactions, then you still pay the 25 quid. And I think that's where...
Would some businesses have a model where they're likely to pay suppliers in cash, therefore they want to keep cash coming in?
I think it would be small business. You could. I wouldn't say I know of any. And my wife's business, we pay 100% backs. I wouldn't pay. If somebody asked me to pay in cash, we wouldn't pay.
And backs, of course, you don't pay a percentage. It's just
exactly,
but it's done on an account basis. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thanks for that. I thought you would. I wanted to ask that.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask you both as well. Do you believe some businesses, or the owners of those businesses who you've maybe spoken to, so those members on your committees, that they were maybe reluctant to go fully digital in terms of transactions due to losing potential customers in going cashless?
Well, that's my reason. It's a customer service issue for us. While I would stop tomorrow if I felt I could, because there's absolutely no benefit to me of taking cash. I would love to stop, and there'll be a point when we will make that decision. But right now, we're still leaning to the both sides. We will take cash where it's offered as a customer service issue.
Yeah.
But I think that if we were bigger, or if it became 5% or less, I think we would probably move, because then the cost relation is much higher for us managing that small amount of cash. And I'm fairly confident that's maybe 4 or 5 years away.
Okay. And I know obviously a few of the stakeholders who come before the panel already, they've mentioned about digital transactions being more cost effective for them as a business. And I was wondering maybe if you could just enlighten us as a panel on some of the experiences that your colleagues have had running their businesses in terms of the lower rate of charges that are applied with digital transactions compared to cash that they shared with you.
From my side, I didn't get any of that detail in terms of sharing kind of like exact costs or anything like that from. So
that's commercially sensitive, and they wouldn't share. But I think I've answered that question probably already in the fact that the bigger you are, the less you pay.
Yeah.
And that scale is quite different, so that's why the answer to the small retailer is that it's disadvantaged because they're paying a higher fee. But it's still, in my view, better to have a card cost-wise than it is to have cash. If you're in the central market, you can walk around to the bank around the corner, so your banking charges are probably a lot less than mine with 2 people in a car from St Mary to St Bernard's and back. So that cost difference is there, but
Can I just ask, in terms of when you were negotiating the rates with the bank, was it a fairly quick process, or?
Yeah, it's generally down to the business. There'll be 1-year contracts as a common space where they'll review annually. As a relatively structured business, we have a process to review those annually. We'll then contact the card company, look at there's different charges for different cards. That's the other thing, so it's not as simple as it sounds. We don't pay one rate for all. Every card has potentially got a slightly different rate. The type of card determines the rate often. So it isn't straightforward. It's quite complex. I wish that was a lot simpler. Because I'm at it a long time and I still don't fully understand the structure they use. Commercial cards, for instance, if my company card has a much higher rate for processing than my personal card for the person receiving that money. So I think there's the right thing to do is annually review it and then contact your card provider with the evidence of the year's transactions or your business projections for the following year if you're intending to grow. Or if I was moving entirely to a card only, I would negotiate on the basis that I would convert my cash into card. And they are generally quite good. They'll give you, that negotiation takes, a phone call and 30 minutes less, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So they're quite good, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think we've covered a lot of ground already. I think so. In some ways, our question plan's gone out the window. It's possibly my fault, but I think you've answered so well in many cases anyway. In terms of I suppose transparency for customers, and it could be in any line of products or services. Do you think there's an argument that if we do leave it down to businesses to decide how people pay for things, is there an argument that clear signage maybe needs to be improved so that nobody gets in an embarrassing situation where you go to buy your coffee or fill up your car and then realise you haven't got the means to pay for it? Is that something we could encourage? Do you think it's something that, yeah?
Yeah, I do. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the people who do it cash only already do that really well, because
Card only.
they don't want anybody standing in front of the till and embarrassed. And they've probably the first week they did it, they had that. And I think they've quickly corrected those. And I think, we all know who takes cash only, and but it could be a simple sticker or a...
Become increasingly the norm. Is there anything that you think government could or should be doing to manage that transition period, or even to shorten that transition period?
Alex?
Not that I can think of.
I think you let industry run is the main thing, rather than prevent it, because the customer and the business will decide. And the customer will decide to shop at a business or not, and the business will decide whether that impacts them or not. So I think naturally society figures it out, and you let it run. I think to accelerate it, probably not. I think it's going at the right pace. I think we could probably, it would help maybe if we had a marker that we're aiming towards it in, say, 5 years' time, and that would make us a lot more efficient again. I think the costs of cash, managing cash to the banks, and the reasons for that probably should be more clear as to why legislation is so burdening on them, that they're putting the price of managing that. But it is all volume. The less cash we have, the more costs, because you're managing a smaller
Self-fulfilling
part.
in a sense, I think.
Yeah, so as soon as you get to where we are now, there is almost a need for acceleration, because it's a much higher proportion of cost now that we have so little of it. It's disproportionate. But I do think I'd like to probably see, from government's point of view, some genuine data around where the vulnerability is, who's affected and how. And I think business will work quite happily with a solution to that, with anyone that's need. If there's a prepaid card or anything else, we're an industry that's customer service led, so we're quite happy to take that on board.
When you say prepaid card, is that where people who may not have bank accounts could...
Yes, and you have it
cash?
during COVID. We got those £100
Yeah.
cards from that Northern Ireland company. That's a typical example. You don't need a card. We could have a generic system like that sells you a card, and you put £100 on it. And we all have, my 11-year-old son has got a Go Henry card, so he doesn't have cash. His pocket money's paid into his card every week.
But that's done digitally, right?
Yeah,
But there could be a cash equivalent, which cash in one end.
It comes in, I have a little standing order for his pocket money to go out of my account and onto his card every week, and then he has it on his card to spend.
Yeah. Yeah, good. No, we've heard of suggestions like that. And if government were to say we've got a plan, a 1 year or 3 year or 5 year plan to take Jersey cashless, would you welcome that kind of strategy generally? You don't need to commit to it, but
Alex?
your gut instinct.
I think that is the way ultimately, as we've talked about, that is the way, not just Jersey, outside of that. I think that is the way that society is leading to. So I think asking a question in terms of would that be accepted, I think from a committee's point of view, I think, retailers would still potentially want to be able to do both. There'd still potentially be a nervousness around taking it away. But like you say, if that was a 1, a 3, a 5 year plan, fast forward to 5 years' time, and actually I think we're going to be in a position where the percentage of cash at 8-10% is then going to be considerably lower and potentially less than 5. And I think that nervousness, say for example, if businesses had it in 5 years' time, I think that would slowly kind of like decline, and that nervousness wouldn't be there as much.
I think I wouldn't want to comment on the industry taking it, because I do think as a customer supplier, conversation, really. However, it would help if there was a defining line in 5 years' time that we said if it went below 5%, the island would support a change to cashless society, because then it's not a competitive edge that if I take it and you don't, that we have a difference that's removed from the table as a competitive edge. And I do think it would be better for society. It's more sustainable. It's more green. Cash. There was a time before cash, and then there's cash, and now we're nearing a time after cash. And I think we're just moving with that next generation. We're not ahead. I think we're the right level of the rest of the world, but it's customers lead, and I think we just judge the mood and the time. But I think that piece of work on who's affected, my own view is it's relatively small. I've never, and we have 4 retail outlets and a cafe, and I've not had any of the staff say to me, we've turned a customer down because we haven't been able to take the payment. We've had our credit card machines go not to them, and that's probably the only example I'll give is if your credit card machine goes down, how do you operate as a business? And that happened, I think in America. My sister lives in New Jersey, and they had no power for 4 days. They couldn't buy food, couldn't buy petrol, and it was quite difficult to live. So cash, I think it'll stay around for certainly 5 years, and I think you probably have to review it in 5 years' time and see where we are then. However, a cashless society depends on electricity, and so I think you'd have to measure the risk around that.
Yeah. And we did have that incident in Jersey recently. I'm not sure how widespread it was, but during the review, we were doing outreach work, and people did say, it's lucky, we had an outage last week and I paid cash. Of course, the shop then needs to have the wherewithal to accept cash, of course.
But we had us up at the airport. There was a scenario where it wasn't just the whole till system was down.
Really?
So even if a passenger had cash, the transaction still couldn't take place because from a retailer's point of view, that's how you control your stock system.
Yeah.
So if your till isn't working and your back of house system isn't working, regardless of whether the customer had cash or not, the whole back of house system couldn't process the transaction. And anyway, so
that's very true. With your policies and procedures, even if you were to buy petrol, you wouldn't be able to buy it without the till telling you you can sell it, because there's live stock, and the stock is managed in the auditing trail. So there's much more complex than just saying, well, give me the £10 and carry on. You could do that in a tiny business where you can write down what you sold and put in after the power's back up, but that's a tiny amount of businesses. We certainly, if we didn't have electricity, we would stop operating until we had a backup, generally.
Yeah. Unless it's prepaid, of course. People who are prepaid.
Unless it's prepaid,
let them in, do the tour.
That wouldn't work either, because in order to check they're prepaid, we would need the devices.
Yeah, you need
They scan in when they arrive with that ticket on a QR code.
So when we had the outage up at the airport, for example, the retail units were closed. They had to close because there was no way that they could perform a transaction. Our food and beverage outlet, again, that was down. We provided a free of charge service.
Cash wouldn't help that. Effectively, electricity defines our electricity and the internet are the two things that define whether we open or not. Without those, most businesses in Jersey wouldn't operate.
So have you got any?
No, I don't.
Well, if I can, we've got a little bit of time, and if this is above your remit, just let me know. But could you talk to me about we're yet to hear from ministers. That's just because they're coming in later. We've kind of they're towards the end of our review, and from a governmental point of view, insofar as it might affect the tax base, can you comment on what the benefits might be to the getting rid of some of the negative effects around the informal economy or even the illegal economy? So if I put it to you, for example, that your members may generally have a feeling that the lower the tax base, the lower the tax rate in Jersey for corporations or businesses, generally that's better. But if there's fiscal leakage because people are not declaring tax and they're paid cash in hand, that means that the tax burden falls greater on those who legitimately declare and pay their tax. Do you have any considerations about the benefits of moving to a cashless society from a government's point of view in terms of making sure that everybody pays their taxes and contributes to public services, etc., roads that also get customers around the island? Or am I leading you a bit too far down that road?
Well, I'll say it's more personal from Chamber, but I think having grown up in Ireland where, you know, cash in hand was a common thing in my youth and some time ago now, I think you're significantly better off with a cashless society, and I don't mean that lightly. I think 99-to-1 benefit now. Everything as a business, we feel really confident running the business that everything's above board because we don't have cash as the majority. We don't pay in cash. We don't pay suppliers. Most of what we receive is digital, and that makes business really clear and easy because it's down to human error or honest people or all these elements. You're removing all those risks when you don't have cash, and it's just more to do. In my 28 years ago in retail, I would spend a proportion of my week not dealing with customers, but chasing where that money disappeared to yesterday. So it was very inefficient for the business. And back then we didn't have, you know, living wage and all that coming down our way. We now want to focus on customers and growth and not on where's the money gone. And also I have, you know, experienced even in Jersey, suppliers, not regular suppliers by the way, but an old supplier wanting cash payment, of which we absolutely refused to ever do and would. And I think that's the same for, you know, the Chamber of Commerce members generally. We're in business to do business properly. Yeah. But I can see it being, cash is a negative to another society in terms of business activity.
Anything to add?
No, I don't. I think from a Chamber's point of view, there won't necessarily be anything to add, and from a personal point of view, there's nothing that I, you know, disagree with on Tim or would like to add.
There is one more thing. So we've had the general stance from, let's say, the business community or even the Consumer Council, Digital Jersey, and Hospitality Association has been let businesses decide what they want to do. But there has been some nuanced comment even within that, saying that there might be certain types of goods and services, governmental ones, for example, but not exclusively, or monopolies, essential services where the choice should remain, or a proper choice in the sense that you should be able to use cash if you want to. Do you have any thoughts about what exemptions there might be to safeguarding both methods of payment for certain industries or businesses?
I think it's the other way around. I think you should deal with who would not want to pay by card and why, and address that.
Okay.
If you want to pay by cash, it must mean, you know, there should be a criteria that you look at. Why is that? You know, because I would question why, and I don't have an answer to that, but I would really want to know.
That might question your question around the whole tax and
why are you wanting to pay by cash would be my question, because I haven't got the answer.
So apart from those who just say, I want to pay cash, but I can pay by card, we think that there are definitely people out there who don't have a bank account and who can only pay cash. So whether they go to a sports centre or a coffee shop or a petrol station, for example, and it can be a GP. You know, there are often cases of people turning up to a GP and saying, even paying £10 a week, so that's the way they pay, and that's accepted. The question then becomes around so on the one hand, we might suggest that's a good enough reason to say that all of these businesses of that sector should offer a choice, or are you saying to us government should really say, look at those individuals and try and then say, well, how can we facilitate you having a different method?
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's
So you'd
exactly
favour that latter.
How can you turn their cash, you know, it might be through the Treasury or through customer service, where they go in with their £200 and load that onto a a credit card style or pre-card style, which you can do. Well, you can do in the post office in other countries. You can buy travel cards, preload money on. It's not new. You're not going to have to invent it. It's off the shelf. This technology. I have it when I go traveling. I get a Euro card and I load money onto that quite easily. You just walk in with the cash to the post office and you buy a Euro card with however much money you want on it. So it's already there, and I think the post office could facilitate that in Jersey easily, or customer service of government, where people, you'd have to ask where they're getting the cash, and could that not be transferred to the card?
That was going to be my question. So is this people that are potentially drawing down a pension?
Yeah, I think it's literally people who just only have cash. So there are people still who, for example, might get their income support paid in cash because they don't have a bank account. There are people who might have come out of prison who don't have a bank account, or people who have become insolvent or had a divorce and they're, for whatever reason. And
So you just load that to the card instead
yeah.
of giving them, which would save government significant money also.
yeah, no, good. Thanks for that. Right, I think that's everything from me.
Yep.
Have you got anything you would like to ask us, or you think we should be thinking about that?
No, I think in summary for me, I think we're collectively agreed from both committees, and I think that's the sounding point, that right now in the current space, it should be a decision left for businesses and for consumers to work out in the short term. In 5 years' time, you probably want to put it in the calendar for review.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think everything that I'd wanted to talk about throughout the questioning today, we've covered off between the both of us.
Good. Well, look, I'll bring this to a close. If you think of anything after this is finished that you didn't say, you can always give us an email. Send an email to one of our officers, and we'd be grateful for that. If I can just say thank you for coming in again. We appreciate your time.